Verena, thanks very much for coming into us today in Queally's. We nabbed you off the street.
You did.
Have you memories of this bar? It's been closed since 2003. Have you any?
Right, 2003. So the very first Miltown I think I came to was in 1996, which was the year that I moved to Ireland, and I came here with Verena Commins, and the two of us camped. I don't even know where we camped, and I can remember being in here, and at the time, and most of Alton were in here, which was kind of very exciting at the time. I can remember, trying to squeeze in at various different times into this bar. It was I was very sad when it closed. Great spot.
So you might just tell us a bit about your own background, where you grew up, and maybe early introductions to Irish traditional music.
Yeah, so I was born in Coventry, which is in the West Midlands in England, and I guess I was born there because my parents emigrated from Mayo along with an awful lot of other people in the late 1940s and 1950s then to England. So I grew up there, and there's a huge Irish population, a huge Mayo population, but a huge Irish population as well. And I think actually there was the highest amount of Irish-born people kind of as percentage of capita in Coventry than there was in any other city in England. So grew up there and started playing music. There was a branch of Comhaltas that was set up by a box player called Vincent Tighe from Cavan, from Virginia in County Cavan, and I'm the youngest of the three of us. I'm the youngest, and we all started to learn traditional music. We all learned classical music as well. My parents weren't musicians, but my mother in particular was mad into music, and kind of I think herself, she never really got, there was never, I say, even the money to buy an instrument in the house that she was reared in. So she kind of took the opportunity to make sure that we played music, we did Irish dancing, we did all the kind of second generation Irish things. And I guess Irish music was a really important kind of way that our lives were kind of shaped and organised, and it was a huge part of the identity of being second generation Irish. So it was a really important part of our upbringing in Coventry. And Vincent Tighe, fair play to him, and he taught a lot of people. There was certainly never any money exchanged. There'd be a session in St Brendan's Club, a bit of a lesson and a session on a Tuesday night. I think even a lesson is maybe a very kind of a formal word that it really was a very informal kind of affair. And then there'd be a Queally maybe once a month then in St Brendan's as well, and there'd be all the show bands, or kind of, it was the end of the show band era, but all those bands were still touring and coming into Coventry as well. So that's kind of, you might spend your weekend in the same place too. So that's kind of the way we grew up in Coventry. Spent our summers then coming to Ireland, and I suppose always had this kind of hankering and a bit of a romantic idea really about moving to Ireland. My mum and dad talked about that for, I think, during the 70s when things started to improve here. They talked about moving back, and it never really happened. I think my dad had been made redundant because it was all redundancies, and once Thatcher got in 79, England became a kind of a, and I suppose during the Troubles, and there was a lot of anti-Irishness, and there was certainly an eagerness to move back to Ireland, but it didn't happen. But I think it was always in the back of my head. So it happened eventually.
And both your parents were from Mayo?
They were, yeah. Mum was from just outside Ballina, and my dad was from Bahola. So yeah.
Okay, so summer holidays would be visits back to both of those places? Both
of them. I mean, they're like 12 miles apart where they came from. So we'd come in August. If we were lucky, you might get 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, and we'd always go to wherever the flower was. Then the last weekend in August, that's where we'd end up, and then we'd come home. And we never really went anywhere else. We never. There was no such thing as a going abroad now or anything for holidays. But we were all quite happy. We were delighted to go back. And I suppose they both come from rural Ireland. They both came from farms, and we'd be kind of you'd almost be kind of gone feral. When you'd get back. There was kind of a freedom that when you grew up. I grew up in suburban Coventry, and I loved rural Mayo. I absolutely loved it, and still do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
did when you came back, did you have any kind of like cousins or summer friends that you could play music with?
Well, here's the mad thing. I mean, to be honest, there was very little music where either of my parents come from. So we'd play music once we got to the Fla, and we did Scoil a few times as well. But there was very little music in Mayo, so I didn't have much of an association of traditional music. Bizarrely, with Mayo, it was kind of everything else about being in Ireland.
But Vincent Ty, who taught you, was... did you get lessons directly from Vincent Ty?
I did, yeah.
So he was a Mayo man?
He was from Cavan.
Oh, sorry, you said Cavan.
Yeah,
sorry,
he was from Cavan. And he actually, I mean, he emigrated, he came back to Cavan. I guess he came back in the 80s actually. I was, young enough, but he taught, he had a real legacy left behind him, before he left. Yeah.
And who would have been in your peer group then in Coventry? Any of the musicians attending the classes?
Yeah, I mean there wasn't a huge amount of us. So I had two sisters who played. I had four cousins who all played as well, and one of them, Elaine O'Sullivan, she's back in. She's up in Malbay. She came back as well, and she's also a box player. And there were a number of musicians, and I suppose it was a real intergenerational thing. There wasn't a huge amount of people my age. And to be honest, as a teenager, I didn't, pass that much remarks on traditional music. It was really after I went to college that I got bitten by the kind of the bug. I went to Bradford University, and in my later years up there, I started to go more and more to the Leeds Irish Centre, which is another Mayo kind of hotspot as well, and kind of fell in with musicians there. And that's when I really, really started to listen and to play and start learning tunes, madly, I suppose. Yeah.
And your primary instrument was the accordion?
Button accordion, yeah.
Was it
B and C, yeah. And I mean, and Vincent we were lucky because Vincent used to tune, and he kind of sourced accordions as well, and he was kind of an amazing fella. He was, he fixed clocks, and he could make, anything. I played the baron for a while. I remember he made me a lovely baron stick on his lathe. He was a really, really talented kind of fella. So, button accordion. And I also I learnt, so I did classical music on the piano, and so I kind of did a bit of traditional music, and I would have done a lot of accompaniment then on piano over the years with different Queally bands and, whoever. And then I also played classical violin too, and that was the one thing I never really managed to transfer. I never really played the fiddle very, very well, and sometimes I still kind of wish I could play the fiddle, and I think if I was to ever start all over again, I would start on the fiddle because it's just my favourite instrument. But button accordion's grand. Not complaining about the accordion. And button accordion, and I suppose I love playing with fiddle players. So that's kind of what I really like.
And just related to the accordion, then did you kind of think much about developing styles or kind of exploring the styles of older players, either that you knew or older players from previous generations?
Yeah, I mean, so again, and maybe it's another thing with growing up in the diaspora. The word regional, or the phrase regional style wasn't something that was on my radar, until I was late in my teens, So we kind of grew up and we learnt from Vincent, and that was the way that we played, and we didn't we weren't listening widely. I certainly wasn't listening to older recordings when I was a youngster, and even then, it was really when I came, as I got older, and particularly when I came to Ireland, that I really started listening to other musicians. But I generally listened to fiddle players. I was never really, more lately, I know there's lots of people who are influenced by, the 78s, PJ Conlon and all the 78s that came from the States. And even the people Vincent Ty was I said he would be a contemporary of, or maybe just a bit younger than Joe Burke and the Paddy O'Brien, and he was really coming through that kind of B&C style. I don't know, I kind of listened to everything, and I would say of a very kind of hybrid, style. I certainly never kind of, went any particular way. The one thing that I got completely hooked on was Paddy Fahy and Paddy Fahy tunes. And I live in East Galway, and I think there's a little bit that fed into it. I ended up living in East Galway, and I ended up in UL doing an MA in ethnomusicology. It was actually the first year that course ran in, I think it was 97, 98 or 98, 99. Anyway, end of the 90s. And I remember I did a science degree initially. I hadn't a notion of doing... Well, I had thought about doing a classical music degree, and my violin teacher was really eager for me to do that. Anyway, I didn't see any route out of a classical music degree other than either really teaching music or performing and there's a real kind of a class issue attached to, I guess, being a second generation Irish, when you're very much in a kind of working class I suppose space, and I played in a lot of orchestras and various different things. I had this kind of like, I almost had like a split personality. It was very by musical kind of upbringing. And so anyway, so I kind of associated that with classical music, and I knew I didn't want to go, that's a space I didn't want to particularly go into. Completely gone off track now. I can't even remember what the question was.
No, that's it's all good. Yeah, it was just about the styles.
Oh, style, yeah. So East Galway was the most thing I kind of got into, but I wouldn't even say. I mean, and then when you think about East Galway and the accordion, I know, and you've got Joe Burke, and then you've got Joe Cooley, who couldn't be, very, very different players as well. So there's no. So again, it was always the fiddle that kind of, that I was led by more than any box players. And then when I moved to Galway, I lived in Galway City for about 5 years, and then we ended up buying a house. We were lucky we bought a house when you could still afford to buy a house, and it was an old house out in the townland of Ballyshe, which is just outside of Kilcreest, and it's right beside the Rowland household. So Raymond Rowland, who emigrated to England, and then his brother Oliver, who was still there, who only died. Well, it's probably more than 10 years ago now. So I was really lucky I got to play a lot with Oliver, who was a real real character. He was a really lovely box player. And I probably played more piano with him, He got when I moved out there, he hadn't been playing for a long time, and he kind of got a new lease of life, and we used to, we'd play, a good bit. He used to come I remember bringing him into the Crane pub in Galway. Did a concert, kind of a kind of early evening concert in there at one time, and yeah, it was a really special time now, having the opportunity to play with Oliver.
Okay, and so that's where you're living now, up around Kilcreest?
Around Kilcreest, yeah.
Okay, because
yeah.
actually we were out there last year in Kilcreest. We met up with Peter Gardner.
Oh, that's right, with Aoife Granville. Yeah, I saw, that was another wonderful, another great drama from the well.
Yes, he's still going strong.
Yes,
he's a gas man.
He is, yeah.
And so just kind of, being, as you say, kind of like second generation Irish and being part of the diaspora in kind of Coventry, and then you went up to Bradford and then kind of hanging out in Leeds. Obviously you had a gang that you were kind of hanging out with and playing music with, but did you ever kind of have any sense that you were kind of like did you ever encounter any attitudes about like with people over there, like either in the Irish community over there or maybe in the kind of whatever you want to call it, the English community, about like what you were doing or what you were into? Like, did you like whatever?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Music, Paddy Wacker.
Yeah, so it was. I mean, when I think about when I was growing up in Coventry, I mean, there was a big Irish population. There wasn't many really people playing traditional music, so there wasn't. And the school that I went to a comprehensive secondary school that was, not say it was a rough school, but it was, it was rough enough. And so even walking around with an instrument, you'd kind of mind yourself that, you wouldn't do anything to try and stick out, so going around with a fiddle was one thing, a button accordion. I mean, there wasn't very many button accordions in Coventry, really, opposed to whoever it was that Vincent taught, and there wasn't that many of us. So I can't say I certainly didn't experience any kind of direct racism. I mean, it was very much in the ether, and I think my parents certainly did, not in terms of music now, but just there was a general kind of underlying anti-Irish sentiment for sure in Coventry. It wasn't overwhelming in any way. I do remember, so I played classical music on the piano, and I had this I thought she was an ancient piano teacher. She probably wasn't that old, but and she was just very English and very proper. And every year she'd say, "So, where are you going on holidays?" And we say, "Well, we're going to Ireland." And she'd always say, "Oh God, I do hope you're not going up to the north." So there's the whole thing about the north. And I used to say to my mother, because I was very, when I was young, "Where are we going to?" She said, "We're going to the west." Just to ignore her. She doesn't know what she's saying. But when I started playing traditional music on the piano, she used to, and she found out that I was playing traditional music, she'd say, "Oh, you're thumping now. Your left hand's thumping. It's that Irish music." So the Irish music was at fault then for my thumping left hand. That was the, So there was no, but I didn't experience any kind of blatant. And to be honest, there was such a big Irish community that we really existed within. I mean, when I think about my mother, who's not with us for a long time, I'd say she had no English. She didn't know anybody who was English, apart from maybe people that she worked with. I mean, they had the whole network of Irish people, because there was probably 20 Catholic primary schools in Coventry that were all, full of people like me, second generation Irish, and there was kind of 3 big secondary Catholic secondary schools. So, you know, our lives were, I think when I was, and we lived in a real working class area, and there was a lot of Irish people, and there was a lot of people from Pakistan, and that was, and India. And it was all we were all the immigrants, you know, in many ways. So, I can't say I ever experienced. And I guess the big thing was, you know, we were playing Irish music, and we were very much there was the three of us, my sisters, and we did a lot of things with, you know, we were involved with Comhaltas, we were involved with the Pioneer Association. My parents were pioneers, and we'd be playing at lots of different, you know, events and playing for dances, and we danced ourselves. And maybe if people were coming over, like the chieftains would come over and play in Coventry, and we'd often be involved in some kind of support role then, you know, so we were churned out a lot of the time, you know, for playing for various different things. And we were the Irish girls, you know, and then we come over on holidays then to Mayo, and we were the English ones, you know, and it used to drive me insane, you know, and it's kind of a joke now when people are talking about English people, then they say, oh, we don't mean you know, and I say, it's kind of, you know, and I get affronted because it's kind of funny to get affronted, you know.
Yeah, and so it goes from that, you're kind of...
I know, you're Irish in one place, and we come over here and we were English, you know, and I will, you know, I haven't lost the English accent, and it's not going anytime soon, so, yeah. Yeah,
and so you made the move over here, and you're living in the city first, and what drew you to Galway City, if I may ask?
Yeah, so I guess when I moved up to, after I started playing with musicians in Leeds, and there was a real, there's a load of musicians I played with have all kind of moved back, you know. We used to talk about we used to come over to the Fleadh Nua. That was a big thing. There was a big connection between Leeds and the Fleadh Nua, and you come over the weekend and we'd all be crying coming home, you know. And to be honest, every time I came back from Ireland, you'd be kind of crying. You just, you know, you just wanted to stay. So when I moved, in the end then, I finished my degree. I got this very nice research job for 3 years on a contract, and it came to an end, and I was like, okay, I could have gone and done a PhD then actually, and I decided, you know, I just had an opportunity to try, you know, moving. So I went over to Mayo. I went and moved in with an auntie of mine, my mum's sister. My mum was delighted because my auntie was recently widowed, and you know, it was great. And then I was in Mayo then, and then, you know, started to meet up with various different musicians, Julie Langan being one of them, and eventually then, you know, I was going out nearly every night of the week then in Mayo playing tunes. My auntie was mortified, you know, that I was here and I wasn't working, and I was going out playing tunes really late every night. She was and in the end, people kept saying, you know, you should just go to Galway, like it'd be much kind of handier, you know, and there's tunes the whole time. So I never for a minute, I mean, when you're living in England, you don't kind of realise that the opportunity to actually play, you know, the entire time actually exists, you know, in places like Galway. So I moved to Galway, and it was kind of it's one of the best periods in my life, I suppose. Those first kind of 2 or 3 years that I was living in Galway and just listening to music and playing music and learning tunes the whole time. It was heavenly. It was great.
Where were the spots at the time? Was it still...
It hasn't changed that much. It was still the Crane Bar and I suppose Taylor's, which is...
Gone.
Well, it was gone. It's back again now.
It was
the
one that was at the Rushing Dove.
Yeah, it was I think it was a lap dancing bar for a while. Yeah, I was never in there at that point, but it's back. It's back under new ownership, and it's now Taylor's again. I'm not sure there's tunes in there anymore. I mean, I'm not up to date with Galway, but certainly as much as I was. But Coaley's, which wouldn't have been there initially, but you know, opened when and Coaley was a great. Yeah, Coaley used to work in Taft's bar, which was just across the road. So there was great tunes, and there'd be tunes in Taft's and tunes in Coaley's, and the Front Door was another place that used to have nice tunes. And then Áras na Nail, and the Conor na Gaeilge bar, which was kind of it was kind of an amazing place actually. And I used to play. I had a gig in the Crane on a Saturday night for years, and the big thing was to get into the Áras afterwards. And I was very lucky because I ended up marrying somebody who was behind the bar in Áras na Nail. So I was guaranteed to get in. So I was very popular, you know. And I can remember it's the only phone number I could ever remember, because you'd have to ring up to see could you get in, because it was a club, and there was a kind of it was like a gateway that you had to get unlocked to get in, and you could be in there then until, I don't know if it's you know, they'd kind of whoever's working behind the bar, they'd kind of throw out most people, and then they'd keep the musicians, and you could be in there until whatever time in the morning. It was a great spot.
And was it in Galway that you got to know then Julie Langan and the Kevils, or where did you meet them?
So I met Breda Kevill. Breda Kevill came to Leeds to do radiography. So we had 1 year where we had her first year in Leeds was my last year, and it was with Breda Kevill that I first came to Miltown, and it was actually in Miltown that I met Julie Langan, and I met a whole host of the kind of Mayo crowd, the Dohertys and various different musicians. So, and again, when I was living in Mayo briefly, and Julie was in college in Galway at the time, so there was a good few people saying Pádraig O'Brien was another one, a guitar player from Castlebar. He was living in Galway as well, so it's kind of an inevitable kind of move. Yeah. Yeah.
And yes, you actually, so you went on to record an album with Julie Langan.
I did, yeah.
Tell us a bit about the background to that.
Yeah, well, it was funny. So myself and Julie, when we started, we were playing together relentlessly, it was kind of, we were both, I suppose we were similar in a way, we were just mad into tunes, and we were doing quite a few gigs together, I suppose, and we were just playing together all the time and constantly talking about tunes and putting tunes in sets. And somebody had said, you should record a CD, because then you could go anywhere with it. And it wasn't something that either of us would have considered. God, and I would never have considered making it, if somebody said to me even a year earlier that, you'd be making a CD, I would have thought they were mad. So, I don't know, we were kind of in that milieu at the time. We went in, and it's funny, I was talking to Anya Hennessy about it just yesterday. She was saying how it still sounds like a very fresh, CD. And we literally did everything in pretty much one take. There's a wonderful sound engineer called Pat Neary in Galway. He had a studio up in the Lisbon estate, and we went in a few afternoons, and the two of us recorded everything together. And then Pádraig O'Brien came in, put stuff on the guitar. I think Donna Hennessy came in, and he was one of there was a few people who used to say, just go and record, He was one of the people that encouraged us. There was many people that did. And I remember saying to him, well, if you do, you have to go, play on the track. So he came in and played on the track, and it was just the people that we were, playing with at the time. And we did a bit of we went to the States, then we did a really lovely tour of the West Coast, I think it was the summer after we made it. And then we did a bit of a tour around Ireland as well, and it was a brilliant, great time. We had a great crack, it was really good fun.
And were you into digging out different versions of tunes or peculiar tunes? Because if I remember correctly, there's a Greer tune on your album.
There is
That's probably one of the, maybe as far as I'm aware, one of the earlier recordings of a Greer tune.
Possibly. I remember I learnt it from. So I went to Limerick to do an MA, and there was two people on my course. One was Maureen Groda, the piper, and I learnt that Greer tune from her. And the other one was Jackie Small, who was also doing. And I think they probably had a bigger influence on me than anything else that happened to me that year in Limerick. But it was from more I got the and I think at the time Jackie was working on the last Kilcreest Cuig. I'm trying to think, were they in? And I think they were in that as well. It
might have been volume. Was it 4 or 5?
4 or 5.
Greer tunes.
Yeah. I can't remember which one it was now, but they were in there as well. There was some kind of connection in between, and I donated more on them because they were in there. I'm not quite sure how it actually came about, but it was through that connection. So I mean, I won't say I wasn't at manuscripts particularly. I mean, I was very much learning tunes from other people, and other sources. I wasn't digging at that time.
Yeah, just curious because obviously now you're working with traditional music in UNG. You maybe just tell us a bit about your role kind of in academia and traditional music. Yeah,
I mean, so again, it's all kind of happened by all happenstance really. So as I said, I did a science degree, and when I moved to Galway. And I saw when the masters in UL was being advertised, and I guess for me it was the first time I saw it was a masters in ethnomusicology and those traditional music modules on it, and I was kind of amazed that you could. I mean, obviously you could do a degree in traditional music, or you could do a BA in music and with a big traditional accompaniment in UCC at the time, and probably in Dublin as well. But it was I kind of couldn't believe you could study traditional music at master's level. I mean, it's so kind of common now, it's well, not common, but it's much more normal now, and so I did that. I spent a year in Limerick. Lillis O'Leary was another man who was there. He didn't teach me that much. We had a few seminars with him. He was another really, really big influence. And I I bumped into Lillis he was teaching at UL at the time. I bumped into him in Galway a few years later, and I'd also been talking to Tim Collins, who had been looking at because I did my thesis on East Galway style, and Tim was starting to look at that, and I don't know, it was kind of happen chance. I was saying to, I worked in GMIT for a while. I was working as an administrator, and I was working in Teagasc for a while. I kind of got a kind of research job there. At this point had 2 children, which kind of put a halt to my gallop in terms of playing tunes all the time. And actually, at that point, I decided I needed to get a real job, a 9-to-5 job where you could afford childcare. But I was talking to Lillis, and I said, I'd love to do some more research, whatever. And I went in to see him, and he threw me then over to the Centre for Irish Studies then, which is, so Louis Dupuer is the director of the centre, and Maeve Neorhan then, who I mentioned, she was working there at the time. And it's a really, really small centre, but it's kind of Irish Studies, the way it's configured in Galway, it's literature and music, So I did my PhD, or started to think about doing a PhD on the Willie Clancy Summer School to try and look at actually what happens here. Because I think I know when I came here, and I was in my 20s the first time I came here, but everybody that you speak to within traditional music, I mean, everybody has their first Willie Clancy story, or their, the millions of stories, of being here. So it's this kind of extraordinary kind of place. So I ended up doing a PhD, and then the next minute I ended up lecturing, and then I ended up getting a job. So it's all, none of it was particularly planned. And I never dreamed that I'd be, lecturing in traditional music or in Irish studies,
Yeah, and of course we're here now at Scoil Willie Clancy, and you did a PhD on it.
Yeah.
How many people did you interview as part of that process? Who did you interview?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the hardest thing then about doing a PhD, I was kind of code switching. So I then started to go, come here as a researcher. And again, even then, I mean, slightly more, we're kind of more used to people doing research now on music. Back then, this was in, when was it then? I suppose it was 2008, I think, when I started, 2009 when I started. And I'd be sitting in a session, you'd be playing tunes, and then I'd say, okay, I want to go to the lecture or whatever. And, musicians around would be saying, why would you leave a really good session to go off to a lecture, And what I did was I sat for the first year, I went into the fiddle classes. I actually did the fiddle classes for 1 year. I went into, who did I go to? Sat in Martin Hayes' class, sat in Tommy Peoples' class. And then the next year I sat in in Maura O'Keefe's kind of the archive room. And really I just nabbed as many people as possible then to talk to them. I mean, when I first got in touch with Murish Arohan, when I told him what I was doing, I mean, he was kind of extraordinary, and invited me. I went down to the house, went to visit him, had a fantastic, wonderful interview with him and Una back in the day. And then Harry then was equally, really, really generous as well. And everybody's really generous. Everybody's quite happy to talk to you about, what this means to them, what they think it means, and. Yeah, so it was kind of you were knocking on an open door really, and like that, I like being here now, and I mean, you could really talk to anybody, So I wasn't particularly, I wasn't. Well, there were a few people I did want to speak to, but really, I just and I guess I interviewed probably a lot of fiddlers because that's kind of where I based myself, in the fiddle school.
And actually, I used a quote from your PhD in a blog. Did about Ben Lennon.
I saw that, yeah.
Great quote, came in handy for me at the time.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
But it kind of summed it up in the depression of leaving Miltown after the week, and yeah.
And for anybody who may be awaiting to read your PhD or may want to skip to the last page, had any conclusions?
Well, I mean that's a really good point. And at some point I should. Well, I guess there were particular themes that came out rather than conclusions, because I mean it was very hard to, what was the actual. I mean, with most theses, you have a question like what was the actual question. But I suppose the big themes that came through is like what is happening. So it's about, and I had 3, that it's about performance, like it's about performing music in whatever way. It's about transmission. It's about the transmission of music, and it's about commemoration, which is probably, and commemoration is the most thing that's has kept going for me in terms of research, I suppose, since that time as well, and how we commemorate music. And I guess the thing is, every time you play a tune, you're probably commemorating somebody or some musician. But I've been looking, I suppose, since then. I mean, one of the things I discovered was that the plaque there on the wall in Ballard Cemetery, which isn't isn't part of the gravestone. It's kind of quite separate. Was one of the first plaques then to any traditional musician in the country put up in 1974. It was during the second Scoil. So that I kind of went off into a bit of a, because when I looked at that plaque and I was thinking, well, what other musicians have been other plaques to or monuments to or statues to? So I started looking at that then. That's kind of since the PhD, and discovered that really that's kind of one of the first ones. So the school, and then when you look at that wonderful statue now, and really, the school is responsible for, I mean, in many ways, I suppose it's put Willie Clancy on the map. That's kind of an obvious thing in many ways. And when you see, when I watched that film last night, and when you do actually see him, I mean, he was clearly a really just extraordinary person. But the school has built, created a legacy, and I suppose that's one thing. One of the things that I do talk about is how we deal with that kind of the whole idea is around, what is authenticity, particularly what's authenticity in Irish music, and how do we actually construct authenticity within traditional music and around somebody then like Willie Clancy, and the things that and the idea of ritual and the coming back every year, and the particular rituals that happen there's so many rituals happening all the time, particularly attached to how the teaching and what happens in that archive room in the fiddle school, and the visit to the grave. I mean, that the beginning of the school at the graveside of the hero, there's all these kind of so there's lots of ideas in there,
traditions within traditions,
and they're being remade every year, and
interesting, the idea of commemoration. I guess you could be almost like commemorating a tune every time you play
because and you're either commemorating either the name of it or whoever you learnt it from or whoever it's named after. It's there's all these there's all these kind of micro commemorations happening all the time within traditional music, and then there's all these really obvious, and the tribute concerts and everything around, the way the week really hasn't changed. And actually, Nicholas was talking about this in his lecture on the opening night. Like the whole layout, hasn't really changed that much. I mean, there's more things have been added to it, but there's kind of the introduction of the recitals, and that kind of return to the solo instrument recital. Because if you think about particularly the 60s and that shift in traditional music to the bothy band and that kind of group kind of ensemble sound that's coming from through a reader and through the bothy band. And then you come back, then it is this kind of the idea of coming back to the solo musician, which is really where we imagine it, where it did start.
I was going to say there now. East Galway and Paddy Fahey. Actually, sorry, before we move on to that, the work on the commemoration. I know you've done a lot of work on the statues, plaques. Are you still building that index?
I am, and I need to do something. I kind of have a database now. I mean, I got sidetracked into started looking at murals more recently, which are, it's like where do you finish?
New one in town,
and the new two. I mean, and I can't remember his name now. I was actually chatting to the guy who made them. I mean, you kind of think, when I saw those murals go up, you kind of think, oh, this is the Willie Clancy Summer School has commissioned 2 murals, but that wasn't the case at all. It was another local committee, and they didn't intend having musicians on those murals. They were kind of they were going to have hurlers or some other thing. And when they actually spoke to the mural painter, he said, well, what's the most important thing? He said he does lots of these kind of local murals. What's the most important thing in the town? And they were like, well, it's music, and it's those local other musicians as well. I suppose post Willie Clancy, some of the musicians who, and I heard actually Dale Fox talking about this. These are the people that taught her, and who was the other lady? Is it Marion McCarthy? Yeah, they were all talking about the people that taught them in Miltown, and some of those are on that mural. So murals. I was asked this. Jim Carroll asked me when I spoke about monuments and statues a few years ago at one of the lectures in here, And Jim Carroll, said, and so is there any statues or monuments to singers, And so that kind of sent me off down another rabbit hole, because there aren't very many, but there are some then. And then you're kind of thinking, well, which singers are we thinking about? Because the only statue I could think of was the one to, oh Jesus, the name's going to go for me, she's in Hollywood in Mayo. Oh.
Hollywood in Mayo.
Yeah, and she's not really a traditional singer. Oh God, her name is going right out of my head. I'll come back to it. And then and then you look at those two statues to Luke Kelly, and so where it gets a bit more fuzzy now when you start to talk about singing. So anyway, it's ongoing. The database is unpublished, and it's something I need to. It's a bit never ending though, and then there's originally I'd just looked at monuments that were to named musicians, but then you have monuments that are a bit more very abstract monuments. You've got all these Maid of Erin monuments that have. Maid of Erin's holding harps in their right hand. So when you actually start looking at instrumentation on monuments, so it's kind of it's a bit never ending, but it's brilliant. It's great.
Yeah.
Me.
I guess there's the John Riley plaque in Boyle is one of the few ones, I guess.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and which is a really important. It's important for lots of reasons, non-musical reasons as well. I mean, it's probably the only plaque to a traveller that's raised in anywhere in the country, so it's a really important one. There's a few. There's one to Nicholas Tobin down in Rhine, and there's one to Darach Cahain in down in Rathcarn.
Oh, Rathcarn.
Yeah. There's a few. Yeah, but not very many.
Mm. Yeah. And so, just to come back to your personal preference then for music, which is East Galway music, and you mentioned the influence of Paddy Fahy. Maybe just what you think is kind of what drew you to East Galway, and maybe what you think is particularly interesting about Paddy Fahy's music and compositions.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to, I suppose when I grew up with Vincent High, who was very much a B&C, wet tuned, but an accordion player, and then when I moved up to Leeds. So there is a kind of, talking about regional style, there's a lead style without doubt. There's some real key players up there. So there's John Ferguson as a flute player, and his wife Maureen Ferguson, and then there's a bunch of piano accordion players in Leeds. Probably more because John played the piano accordion. So there's people like Michael Tennyson, Liz Gohan, a fiddle player who's now moved back, and the Fergusons have moved back as well since then. So there was a particular lead style of playing, and then it was actually, I could trace it back to Breda Kevill when she landed in Leeds, and I remember the first time, somebody got her to play her tune on her own, and I think she played, a Paddy Fahy tune, and I just remember listening to it thinking, Jesus, what is that, and it was I was completely transfixed by her playing, and I suppose there's a different approach as well, in her own playing. So that was really kind of what got me into it. There's a different kind of, there's a musicality that's different, and I suppose it's because he's using, he's writing in different modes or keys, that kind of G minor modal thing where you're not quite sure what key you're on. So it was very, very different. And I started to explore, just finding out that there was loads of these tunes, and there's a whole mystery around Paddy Fahy and the non-naming of tunes, and they're all Paddy Fahy's tunes, and you don't know whether how many of them there is, So on account of that, then I can remember. I actually remember Jackie Small saying to me, you should look at Brannock's books, because I didn't have Kilcreest in the hair, and growing up in Coventry, we had O'Neill's, that was our main source, and he was saying there's lots of Paddy Fahy tunes in Kilcreest in the hair, or in a couple of them. And I can remember going into Kenny's bookshop in Galway, and this is the first time I remember getting Kilcreest in the hair and finding Paddy Fahy's tunes, and then it was footnoted. And you could look at the back then, and of course it was all in Irish, because it was Kilcreast in the hair, and it was Brendan Brannock, and that was actually, and I had kind of started learning Irish, but that was a huge impetus for me then to learn Irish as well, because it was the first time I was kind of like, I was very secure in my Irish identity up until that moment, and I was like, Jesus, what's going on here? So Paddy Fahy had kind of all kinds of influences on me, but I guess there's something in his. I don't know, there's a particular, it's the Lonesome Touch, whatever it is, and it's in all of them, it's Paddy Kelly, and in all those kind of composers, there's something very, very beautiful that's kind of slightly outside of what I'd experienced at that time.
So did you find that, you mentioned Lonesome Touch there, did you find that in other East Galway musicians, or was it kind of, you mentioned Paddy Kelly, but was it particular to Paddy Fahy. I don't really know too much about Paddy Kelly myself, so you might have to...
Yeah, well, I guess, yeah, I think it was. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's easy to kind of romanticise that as well. I mean, I think you can to learn some touches in any musician, really, you know. I mean, I increasingly realised at the time that's where I heard it. And even listened to, I remember when I moved to Galway, there was a kind of a bootleg tape going around of Paddy Fahy and Paddy, the flute player, Paddy Carty, you know. And again, I mean, they were very different, you know, musicians. But again, there was something in Paddy Carty's playing too that was kind of would speak to you as well, you know. So yeah, it's difficult to. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the answer is to that question. Yeah.
I think you're the second person in an interview this week who mentioned the Lonesome Touch. Yeah. Who was the other person who was speaking with the Lonesome Touch?
I think it was Morris Bradley.
Morris Bradley.
Okay. Yeah.
With the Lonesome
okay.
Touch, yeah.
So, and you get it in Donegal. I mean, so I suppose one of the other things that I was struck by after I moved to Ireland was Donegal music, because again I'd had no experience of that, and I'm not quite sure how I ended up. I'm trying to think when I met Ronan Galvin, and there was, you know, and there's a few other musicians as well. I'm kind of not thinking of their names now. And I ended up learning, going up to the Gaeltacht in Donegal, and that's where I started to learn Irish. And so I became kind of fascinated by Donegal music too. And I guess for me it was a kind of the realisation that there was such different styles that I'd been quite unaware of, you know, for quite happily learned this kind of homogenous kind of traditional music, you know, so that was a real kind of eye-opener for me. And I think it's particularly in there as well. I remember listening to Neely Boyle actually, and you know, it just, you know, it just, I don't know, taught you in a particular way.
Yeah, pure madness.
Yeah,
Neely Boyle.
Yeah.
How did you find it trying to play or adapt Paddy Fahy tunes to the accordion?
Yeah, well, it's easy, and I think I think in many ways one of the reasons why Paddy Fahy's music is so, you know, one of the ways it was translated beyond East Galway is through Joe Burt, because Joe played loads of his tunes. Even though and this was one of the things when I started doing my thesis, like I would never have thought of Joe Burt as being East Galway style. You know, when you think about East Galway and East Clare and maybe the kind of into the Martin Hayes, you know, even in, you know, over as far as there, I wouldn't have thought to myself of Joe Burt. But actually, it's probably because, I mean, Joe Burt was playing all these Paddy Fahy tunes and bringing them into bringing a listenership to them as well, you know. So it was, I mean, playing a B&C, probably accordion is probably the easiest instrument to play, you know, to play them on, I'd say.
Mm. Yeah. Are you learning the Paddy Fahy tunes from recordings of Paddy Fahy or from recordings of Joe Burt?
From everyone. Probably not from Joe Burt, maybe. Well, maybe it was. I'm sure at some subconscious level, because I mean, I'd listened to everything. I probably, you know, I mean, I picked up an awful lot of tunes. I don't know where I learnt them from, you know, when I first came over. So yeah, quite possibly. And there were tunes that Joe Burt played that were Paddy Fahy tunes that I didn't realise were Paddy Fahy tunes too. I suppose that's yeah.
Verena, that's great. I don't know if you've got any advice you'd want to give to musicians who are like coming to Miltown, going on a rampage, or just what do you think the current lay of the land is?
I think before you come to Miltown, you should go to the archive and do a bit of listening first. That'd be my advice. No, if you're once you've learnt a few tunes, go to the archive.
Thanks, Verena. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. Great to be in Queally.